your voice to the conversation in the comments section.
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, today on the programme, we look ahead to this week in Parliament. Has the energy strategy been delayed? We analyse the state of the nation's finances and Biden's Putin can't remain in power comments and how the country views the Chancellor. All that to come, but first, your morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Ukraine and Russia are due to hold further peace talks in Turkey, although a Ukrainian Interior Ministry advisor says he's not expecting a major breakthrough. Fighting continues in the southern city of Mariupol, with British intelligence showing Russia has gained more ground. The mayor, who's calling for a complete evacuation of the city, says they're on the verge of a humanitarian catastrophe, estimating about 160,000 people are trapped there without heating. Speaking from Kiev, Ukraine's former ambassador to the EU, Konstantin Yuliziev, told GB News his country needs more support.
We need military equipment. We need anti-air equipment. We need anti-tank, weapons. Of course, we need fighter jet. This is with what we can accelerate the victory of Ukrainian armed forces. And here we count very much on you. And secondly, we expect from our partners to increase the level of sanctions. The sanctions must be devastated.
The government has ceded control of NatWest Group for the first time since buying a majority share during the financial crisis. The Treasury has sold £1.2 billion worth of shares, taking its stake to below 50%. The government poured money into what was Royal Bank of Scotland in 2008 to prevent it from collapse. Students in England who are at risk of falling behind in core subjects will be offered targeted support. In the school's white paper, Education Secretary Nadeem Sahawi has set out plans for the next decade, including a parent pledge for pupils failing maths and English. There was drama at the Oscars, with actor Will Smith hitting Chris Rock while he was on stage for making a joke about his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith's hair. It happened minutes before Will Smith picked up the Best Actor award for his role in King Richard. The Academy has released a statement saying it does not condone violence of any form. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, this week is actually the final week of Parliament before a 2.5-week break. Yes, lucky MPs head home on Thursday and won't return to legislative business until after Easter Monday. So what can we expect this week? Could it be the energy strategy, or will that be delayed further still? And what are MPs making of the fallout from the Chancellor's spring statement? Well, joining me now to discuss all that's happening this week is Tony Diver, Whitehall correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. And Tony, let's start off with this energy strategy that has been so long awaited, potentially now not appearing this week.
Yeah, that's right. There's a report in the Financial Times this morning which says that this energy strategy is now going to be delayed until April. That's about the 4th of April, we think, maybe, which is a bit of a concern because that will be the third time that it's been delayed. When it was first announced by Boris Johnson in the days after the Russian invasion, it was said that we were going to be getting the strategy within the coming days. Clearly, for the government, it was a huge priority that Britain could show that it had an independent energy supply, that it wasn't reliant on imports of hydrocarbons from the continent and indeed from Russia. But it seems like in the meantime, all of the plans that Number 10 had to try and bring in more energy supply, either through solar, through wind, through nuclear, have, according to this report, been blocked by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, amid concerns that they're too expensive. So it seems like a Number 10, Number 11 row, 'twas ever thus, is behind all of this. But I mean, for those who are concerned about the UK's energy supply and what's going on in Ukraine, this is pretty worrying.
Certainly worrying, and it's so interesting to look at those dynamics between Number 10 and Number 11, particularly, I suppose, with the financing of nuclear power very expensive, but also when it comes to contentious political issues. We know that a lot of Tory backbenchers are very worried about onshore wind, for example, and indeed there is that row going on and on about British natural shale gas, about fracking. To what extent are these just monetary issues that the Treasury is worried about, or is politics to play too?
No, absolutely. I mean, on both of those issues, on fracking and on wind, a lot of the issue is about whether or not people, the constituents who elect these MPs, are happy to have these energy generation sources around them. And I mean, for fracking, the concern is that it produces seismic activity, sort of earthquakes, essentially, which people are worried about. And there's some evidence that it pollutes water supplies and that sort of thing. With wind, people just don't like them. They think it's ugly. People don't want onshore wind farms on their nice agricultural land because they think it spoils the view. So the problem is that these constituents are then putting pressure on their MPs. They're under pressure to put Number 10, to do the same to Number 10 and to try and stop these developments. There's actually a really interesting one I wrote about in the Telegraph this morning, an offshore wind development happening in Suffolk. The government's very pro-offshore wind. We're expecting offshore wind to be in the energy strategy. Boris Johnson loves it. But unfortunately, the people who are upset about this offshore farm, who live on the coast, are the constituents of Therese Coffey. And so there's now a row in the cabinet about whether or not it's going to happen. So it seems like, no, you're right, not everyone is rowing in behind Number 10 quite as much as you might have expected given the situation in Europe.
Fascinating that people can think that their view, which is essentially of nothing, of sea, just looking out, that can somehow be spoilt. I don't quite understand that one, but let's look at what how the Chancellor is received, of course, because his statement didn't go down universally well last week. Is this a man under more pressure than he has been before?
Well, I think so. I mean, he's under pressure from both sides, isn't he? Because on the one hand, you've got Conservative MPs who say that what the Chancellor did on energy is not good enough and that people in this country are still struggling with their energy bills. On the other side, you've got MPs who are saying that the tax burden has gone up from 33% of GDP to 36% of GDP, which means that Rishi can't really be the tax-cutting Chancellor that he promised to be all along. So, I mean, he's under pressure from both ends on this issue. And I think that there are a lot of people who were pretty underwhelmed by what we heard last week. And in fact, there were reports in the Telegraph on Saturday that it was the Chancellor, it was the Chancellor who blocked once again Boris Johnson wanting to do more about energy bills. So there's probably a bit more Number 10, Number 11 shenanigans going on behind the scenes here as well.
Just finally, how does this all play into the local elections? Because, of course, MPs are going back for a sizable break at the end of this week. They'll be talking to their local associations. They'll be talking to their councillors, many of whom are up for election on the 5th of May.
Yes, and we're always expecting that local elections to be difficult for the Conservatives. A lot of the seats that are being elected are in London, which is typically a difficult place for the Tories to hold on to seats, particularly at the midterms. But yeah, I mean, as we know, what happens in local elections often charts what's going on in national politics. Only at Christmas were we talking about how it might be Partygate that affects the result of the local elections. And now it seems like this issue with energy, the price of people's bills, and the general cost of living is going to be the thing that is worrying people on the doorstep.
It's fascinating how quickly the political conversation can turn. Of course, Partygate seems to be a distant memory to many, although, of course, we are still waiting for that police report. Maybe that will turn things again. But for now, Tony Diver of the Daily Telegraph, thanks for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Now, a US president who goes off script, worrying the security establishment with off-the-cuff exemptions of emotional-driven outbursts. No, I'm not talking about Donald Trump, but his successor, Joe Biden, who stunned his own administration staff this weekend by apparently calling for Putin's removal as president of Russia. Let's take a look.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all, and may God defend our freedom, and may God protect our troops.
The position of the US and any other civilized democracy is that who leads Russia is a matter for the people of Russia. To appear to advocate regime change can be a very dangerous and escalatory thing to do. Well, Biden's press team released this, realised this, and issued an urgent quote, clarification of the president's words. They said, the president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbours or the region. He was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change. That's from a Biden administration official. I'm not sure how much I believe that clarification. Well, let's talk through everything now with Greg Swenson, chair of Republicans Overseas. Welcome to the programme. This was clearly a mistake from Biden, one that has the potential to escalate things in the region. However, are we just supposed to be used now to American presidents who can't really stick to their scripts?
Well, Tom, you bring up a good point. I mean, there was a lot of criticism about Trump, some of which, I was critical of when he was speaking, shall we say, in an unfiltered manner or undisciplined. But that's exactly what we're seeing from Biden. And the difference is, Trump had a habit of getting in spats with people, of exaggerating, of hyperbole on issues that sometimes weren't that important, that people didn't really care about. Whereas when it was important, like when he was lecturing the Germans in 2018 about defense spending and about natural gas dependence on Russia, he was very disciplined, direct, and to the point, but disciplined. Whereas, this President Biden has really made things difficult for the country. It's not just something that's silly and everybody can roll their eyes and say, oh, that's old Joe, we're tripping on the stairs of Air Force One. These are really important things that have, implications that could have really negative outcomes. And it's not just the one on Saturday. He started the week with the press conference where he was very combative with a CBS correspondent and basically lied about his views on sanctions as a deterrent. He was proven, and there was tapes, obviously, that showed him saying the opposite. Thursday, he mentioned that, that he would respond in kind to chemical weapons. That's very escalatory. Friday, he said to the troops that he was visiting, you will see when you're there. These are 3 moments before the Saturday gaffe, just like the January 15th, incursion comment. These are 4 or 5 events that his staff and the State Department have had to dial back. Of course, they did the right thing. I think there was no choice to dial back, but it's not just the one event, and it's very troubling for Americans.
It's fascinating to me, sitting here, of course, in London, as you are, looking at world leaders, whether it's Macron, who's relatively young, Boris, who's not quite elderly. Of course, we've got many leaders across the Western world who seem to be fairly sprightly or in the prime of their life. America seems to be obsessed with seniority and electing people based on how many years they've done things for, rather than potentially how competent they may be.
Well, that's true, Tom, and that happens. And it's not necessarily the Americans that want that. Sometimes it's party politics. I mean, the Democratic Party basically engineered Joe Biden's nomination by turning the tide in South Carolina, after Biden had come in 5th in New Hampshire and 4th in Iowa. So this is not a candidate that was viewed positively. People want young people. Barack Obama was in his mid-40s when he was elected. Bill Clinton was 43 or 44. JFK was 43. George W. Bush was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. So it's not necessarily an age thing, but also, you look at what's happened with this administration. He was basically engineered in there by the party. And then you had a vice presidential candidate, which was a complete bow to identity politics, when she has little to no knowledge or capacity for the job of vice president, or especially of president. And she dropped out of the primaries before Iowa. So, she was polling in the low single digits. She was number 7 in South Carolina, which is a predominantly African-American electorate for Democrats. So, this is a failed candidate and a very unaccomplished politician, so by most measures. So, this is a troubling time when you lean too much on age or on identity, other identity politics or political groups. You get into trouble, and that's what's happened. And look at, it's not just the Democrats. The Republicans have, Mitch McConnell as the minority leader. You've got, and then back to the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, majority leader. He's pushing 80. Nancy Pelosi is over 80. These are, I agree with you, Tom. Young, 40s and 50s is what you'll see. That's what I hope we see in 2024.
And it's interesting there that you mentioned those more elderly Republicans as well as Democrats. I wonder, in this whole conversation, do the Republicans sort of undermine their own cause here? Might a Republican Party that had some other leading figures be more able to criticise Joe Biden over these gaffes? Because, of course, it's still expected that Donald Trump, of course, no spring chicken himself, and someone who has made gaffes in his career, many gaffes, is likely to be the nominee in 24.
Well, I think President Trump made the gaffes not because of his age, but because he's, unfiltered. And that was, had some appeal. That a lot of people were happy to see that someone was actually saying what they were thinking and appreciated his unfiltered nature. Again, it got him into trouble sometimes, fortunately not in very global, situations or geopolitical situations. They were usually relatively harmless. The press always got excited about it, but this is a little different here. So I'm not sure President Trump's age is as much of a factor. You saw the difference in energy levels during the campaign when President Biden was basically in the basement, which was a wise campaign strategy, by the way. I mean, his staff would do much better if they kept him from any unscripted press conferences or any unscripted speeches. Every time he goes off script, it's a disaster. So, and then back to your question, look, I think the Republican Party, actually develops younger people much better. If you look at the average age in Congress, for example, the Republicans is much lower. You've got Tom Cotton, who's in his 40s, Mike Pompeo in his 50s, Ron DeSantis, who's absolutely crushing it in Florida. I believe he's in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. So, you have a lot of young people that could be great alternatives to President Trump. I hope that one of them is. I think Ron DeSantis would be great. It would be the Trump policies, the Trump movement, without the baggage and without the undisciplined, conversation that we've seen from the last two presidents.
It'll be a fascinating primaries and of course, the midterms before then. There's still a long way to go, although it feels like there's a presidential election all the time in America. I'm afraid we've run to the end of this conversation, but Greg Swenson, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing.
Nice to be here.
Now, during his spring statement, the Chancellor drew attention to a really quite scary-sounding number. A record high expenditure projected for debt interest costs, $83 billion in 2022-23. Now, at face value, that's more of your money going on servicing the nation's debt than is spent on, for example, our defence budget. Only expenditure on the NHS, state pensions and education as a whole are larger. Or so it seems. In reality, that $83 billion number will not actually have to be paid next year, but over many, many years to come. And after an unusual bump next year, the UK's debt interest is actually expected to fall. Well, how can this be? And are the nation's finances actually in a better state than the Chancellor implied last week? Well, joining me now to discuss this is independent economist Julian Jessup. Welcome to the programme, Julian. First of all, can you explain exactly how this situation can be the case? 83 billion sounds like a huge number, but we're not actually paying it this year.
Well, actually, you've teed me up very well. Your explanation was good. What many people think this is about is that the government will have to find an extra £83 billion next year in order to pay interest on the government's debt. That isn't actually quite right. What's happening is that about a quarter of government debt, the cost of that is directly linked to the RPI measure of inflation. So when that measure of inflation goes up, that debt is more expensive. But that additional cost only has to be paid when the debt actually matures. So that's when the bonds are repaid to the private sector investors that hold them. And because the average maturity of this index-linked debt is about 18 years, and some of those bonds don't mature until something like 2062, it's going to be years and maybe even decades before that money actually has to be paid out. And of course, in 10, 20, 30 years' time, that money will be worth less than it is now because the economy will have grown. So relative to the size of the economy, the burden of that debt will be less. So what we're looking at here is the statisticians counting that cost all in one go when it accrues. But in terms of the cash flow, that's going to be spread over a long, long period of time. And that means it's not directly comparable, for example, to the amount of the annual budget for something like defence or education.
That's fascinating because, of course, if it's being paid out over decades and that's already sort of how the bonds have been issued, why on earth did the Chancellor draw such attention to it?
Well, I think for a start, I partly blame the Office for Budget Responsibility here because they consistently describe this number as debt interest costs. And you can certainly be forgiven for looking at this number and thinking that's exactly what it is. But obviously, from the Chancellor's point of view, it was a gift to him because it was able to send a warning to taxpayers, to other spending departments, to number 10 maybe, that if you continue spending enormous amounts of money, then there's going to be a massive interest bill to pay as a result of it. So I think it was good politics for him to draw attention to it. But it wasn't particularly good economics, and I don't think it improves our understanding of the public finances.
The public finances are more healthy than potentially we have thought for some time. Borrowing is going to be lower than expected, even after, or maybe because of, this inflationary problem we've got.
Well, again, that's exactly right. You wouldn't necessarily have got that impression from the budget statement and the accompanying comments. But the Office for Budget Responsibility that crunches the numbers has actually revised down its forecast for government borrowing and also for debt relative to the size of the economy. And as you say, that's actually partly because inflation has gone up. Now, inflation is obviously a bad thing. But as far as the public finances are concerned, it has a small silver lining. If nominal incomes are higher, then households and businesses pay more in tax than they would otherwise have done. And higher prices can boost tax revenues as well. If you think about the extra revenue the government is getting from VAT or fuel duty, for example. So inflation's bad for the economy, bad for households, but it's actually quite good for the public finances. And that gave the Chancellor a lot more wiggle room than he decided to use in order to lower taxes and increase benefits to support households through this exceptionally difficult time.
It's a fascinating issue. I suppose that's a bit of a war chest that could be deployed potentially in that autumn budget. I'm afraid we've run out of time in this conversation. We'll have to leave it there. But Julian Jessup, thank you very much for talking us through that really important issue. Now,
thank you.
As the fallout from the spring statement continues, the polls are frankly confusing. YouGov and Opinion have Labour with a 2-point lead over the Tories. Kantar has the two parties neck and neck at 36 apiece, whereas Redfield Wilton, however, shows a 5-point lead for the Labour Party. So, with local elections just over 1 month away, the Tories are understandably jumpy about their prospects, particularly as the seats up for election are in the parts of the UK the Tories hasn't done particularly traditionally well in, such as London. Well, let's make sense of all of this now with Chris Curtis, the head of political polling at Opinion Research. Welcome to the programme. Your polling firm is one of those ones that has Labour just 2 points ahead, but others show them with a 5-point lead. What's going on?
Well, the big question in the polls at the moment is, what do you do with those who don't know? Because we're seeing not very many people who voted Labour at the last election now saying they don't know how they'll vote at the next election, but lots of people who voted Conservative at the last election saying that they don't know how they'll vote at the next election. And how you deal with that in your polling methodology makes a little bit of a difference to that headline result. So that's why organisations like mine at Opinion or organisations like Kantar tend to have slightly smaller leads for the Labour Party than perhaps some other organisations.
So it's not that you're getting different data in, it's that you're weighting those who say they don't know in a different way.
Yeah. So that's basically that's fundamentally the cause of the difference. I mean, it's quite complex to explain and go into, but basically how you treat that very large pool of voters who went from the Conservative Party at the last election to undecided now makes a big difference to that headline result.
I suppose when it comes to the local elections, that's very different from polling from Westminster elections. People, I think, have a greater civic sense of duty to vote in a general election, and those who say don't know now may well have sort of feel like they have to make up their minds in the final week of a general election campaign. In the local elections, they might just stay at home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very you won't catch me making a particularly strong prediction about the local elections, and it's exactly for the reason that you just set out. I mean, it's very difficult for us pollsters really to work out who is and isn't going to vote, particularly in a local election where you have very different turnout patterns to what you have at a general election. And those voters who have gone from Conservative to don't know, are they going to vote? How are they going to vote if they do? Is a very difficult question for me to answer. So I'm not going to make a particularly powerful prediction. One caveat I would make about the local elections, particularly off the back of your point just there, was that we don't measure local elections really based on overall performance. What we tend to do is measure it based on change from the last time around. How many seats have parties gained and how many seats have parties lost? Now, that's going to matter this year because the last time these seats were fought was 2018, when Labour was also doing fairly well in the polls. So despite the fact that Labour's gone up quite significantly from 2019, they haven't gone up very much from 2018. So that could mitigate against sort of large gains for the Labour Party in the local elections. And there's one more point as well, which is on London. Despite the fact that Labour does incredibly well in London overall, they haven't again seen that much of a swing towards them in London, certainly not as large a swing towards them in London as they've seen in other regions of the UK. So again, that could minimise the number of seats that they gain this year, which could make the result look slightly better for the Conservatives.
Interesting.
Than it might actually be.
Because the Labour Party, of course, has already reached that high watermark in London, I suppose, over the last few years. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme there and indeed the interview, but Chris Curtis, thank you for talking us through those really important issues here. Thanks for joining us. Well, coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick and Mercy, but first, it's the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking quite foggy in places at first, though those skies will brighten and most areas will stay dry. It'll be a great end to the morning across the south and west of England. There'll be a fair amount of high cloud around, but with some warm, bright and sunny spells. A similar picture is likely across the southeast too. There's going to be some high cloud that will make the sun rather hazy, but it will stay dry luckily with some light winds. The dry and bright weather will also be extending into South Wales, although it will luckily be a little bit sunnier for the northern parts of the country, which will see some beautiful skies. Across in the Midlands, there'll be a north-south split too, some bright spells in the south and some more cloudy areas further in the north. More extensive cloud is also likely as we head into the northeast of England. The cloud will possibly thicken at times today to give some showers for Newcastle as well as Sunderland, one or two of which could be quite heavy. Meanwhile, much of Scotland will have sunnier weather. Parts of the east coast could be a little misty though, and patchy cloud in the far south could give an occasional shower. Some showers will also be possible across in the east of Northern Ireland, but most of the province will be bathed in sunshine. With light winds, it should feel quite pleasant out there. The showers will continue to affect central areas during the afternoon and evening, and later on they'll also develop across southern England. And that's how the weather is shaping up today.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Oh, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's and Mercy Moroki. We're on your TV, radio and online, all the way through until midday. Loads to get stuck into today. Are you pro-slap? Are you anti-slap? And